What if the Queen's final will didn't just silence Meghan and Harry, but erase their children from the royal family forever? It began with a quiet hush, an unassuming envelope passed from gloved hand to gloved hand behind the heavy velvet curtains of Balmoral's royal study. No cameras, no flashes, no fanfare. Just a single sealed document, covered in the late Queen's insignia, bearing the unmistakable gravity of finality. But what that envelope contained was far more explosive than anyone could have imagined. It wasn't a simple distribution of property or ceremonial honors. It was a declaration, a separation, a line drawn not in ink, but in blood and loyalty. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Within hours of its quiet handoff, rumors were flying through the palace corridors. Some claimed it was simply a reaffirmation of royal tradition. Others insisted it contained deliberate amendments. Last-minute edits scribbled in the Queen's own hand in the days just before her passing. Yet the truth was stranger than anything the public had dared to whisper. Princess Anne, the Queen's only daughter and perhaps her most loyal confidant, had been chosen not just as a witness, but as the keeper of the will's deepest secret. And when she emerged before the small, hand-picked group of senior royals to read aloud the relevant passages, her voice didn't quiver, nor did it tremble. It struck with surgical precision. The phrase came quickly, unexpected, clinical, and final. Recognized royal descendants residing within the realm. 7 words. That was all it took to upend the fragile house of cards Harry and Meghan had built across the Atlantic. 7 words to strip their children, Archie Harrison Mountbatten Windsor and Lilibet Diana, of their place in the line of legacy. Not just legally, but symbolically, eternally. For Prince Harry, who had once been the beloved, spare, the loyal soldier, the cheeky face of the royal youth, this wasn't merely a bureaucratic omission. This was a scar. A deep, jagged scar across his lineage. For Meghan, it was something altogether more humiliating. After years of headlines, accusations, staged interviews, and carefully crafted media appearances, the Queen's final gesture had bypassed all diplomacy. She didn't argue. She didn't debate. She decided. And Meghan was not part of it. The Queen, always cautious, always subtle, had waited until her final breath to make her sharpest move. And Princess Anne? She had delivered it without blinking. The palace gates may have remained closed that day, but around the world, the roar of the revelation tore through every newsroom, social feed, and living room like a controlled detonation. Why now? Why this wording? Why these children? To understand the weight of this moment, one must travel back. Not just to Harry and Meghan's departure from the royal family in 2020, not just to the infamous Oprah interview, but far deeper, into the personal dynamics of a woman who ruled for 70 years. A woman who saw nations crumble, empires fracture, and her own family tested time and time again. Queen Elizabeth II did not act rashly. Every gesture she made was calculated with the precision of a chess grandmaster in her final match. And what most failed to understand is that this move, this exclusion, was not about cruelty. It was about legacy. For months, even years, whispers had emerged that the Queen was deeply hurt by the Sussexes' behavior. Her courtiers tried to keep it hidden, brushing it off as tabloid fodder. But sources close to the Queen, including a former household aide who had served for over 2 decades, noted subtle changes. She began scheduling fewer phone calls with Harry. Private Zooms with Archie and Lilibet grew less frequent. Her personal diary, though strictly guarded, reportedly included cryptic notes like, "Must ensure clarity on lineage and no ambiguity in legacy." So when Princess Anne stood before the gathered Windsors and read the phrase, "recognized royal descendants residing within the realm," it didn't just land as a legal definition. It landed as an indictment. Archie and Lilibet were not born in the United Kingdom. They were not christened in royal chapels. They were not presented formally to the Queen in any public or ceremonial way. For royal purists, they existed on the periphery, biologically royal, perhaps, but culturally and ceremonially distant. And in the Queen's final moments, that distance became permanent. What followed that reading was silence. Not the reverent silence of grief, but the stunned silence of disbelief. Charles, now king, sat frozen. He had known. Of course, he had known. He'd been consulted, perhaps even pressed to approve. But even he seemed shaken by the finality of the moment. William, stone-faced and unreadable, showed nothing. Camilla, adjusting the gloves she rarely wore indoors, whispered something to a nearby aide. But the most visceral reaction came not from those in the room, but from those who weren't. Across the ocean, in a Montecito mansion lined with hedges and security gates, Meghan reportedly received the news through a private call from a royal associate. Her response, according to someone close to the family, was icy. "How convenient," she allegedly muttered. She waited until she couldn't be questioned. Harry, by contrast, was shattered. Sources say he spent the night pacing, making calls, then retreating into silence. For a man who had just lost the last maternal anchor in his life, it was a second death, this time not of a person, but of a connection, of a legacy he thought could be healed with time. But it couldn't. The Queen's will had spoken. Archie and Lilibet were not recognized. Not with royal titles. Not with inheritances. Not even with ceremonial mentions. And so began the unraveling not just of an inheritance, but of an illusion. An illusion that Harry and Meghan could both reject and retain the crown. That they could criticize and still belong. That distance could equal exemption from responsibility, but not consequence. Now the question turns sharply toward the future. What happens when the monarchy draws a line so explicitly, so unapologetically? What precedent does this set for future generations? And most pressingly, can this fracture ever be repaired? This was not a PR crisis. It was not a rogue leak or misinterpreted statement. It was a sovereign's last word. And Princess, and the woman who had spent her life in the Queen's shadow, never seeking the spotlight, had delivered it with the weight of a kingdom behind her. This wasn't just about Archie and Lilibet. It was about who belongs, who defends, who remains. And for the first time, the monarchy had chosen clarity over compromise. The phrase slipped through his lips like a cold gust of wind slicing through silk, clean, sharp, and impossible to ignore. Recognized royal descendants residing within the realm. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't vague. It was as if the Queen had summoned every ounce of her legendary precision to craft a sentence that would simultaneously shield the monarchy and deliver a final, irrevocable verdict on two small children who had never stepped foot inside the system that birthed them. From a purely legal standpoint, the clause seems simple. On paper, it's bureaucratic. It places criteria for recognition. But in the realm of monarchy, where every word is steeped in centuries of tradition, expectation, and symbolic power, it was a blade. And the wound it left behind would not heal easily. To understand how such a phrase could upend an already volatile situation, we must examine its construction from every angle. Legal, ceremonial, historical, and emotional. First, the term recognized. In royal language, recognition is not about biology alone. A child can be of royal blood and yet not be recognized if they have not fulfilled certain rights or obligations. In the past, many children born out of wedlock, or those whose legitimacy was questioned due to political scandal, were not recognized. Recognition, in this context, is conferred, not inherited. It requires both acknowledgement and ritual affirmation. Then comes royal descendants. This might seem self-explanatory. Archie and Lilibet are, after all, the grandchildren of the reigning monarch, King Charles III. But in royal lineage, the meaning is more specific. A royal descendant isn't just someone born into the family. It's someone accepted into the working structure of the royal institution. Historically, this has included expectations of proximity, presentation, and participation. A royal descendant does not live hidden or entirely removed. They are shown to the people, presented at certain ceremonies, and expected, at minimum, to engage with tradition. The final piece, residing within the realm, is perhaps the most controversial. The United Kingdom, long defined by its monarchy, considers the realm not just geographic, but symbolic. It's where the crown holds legal, cultural, and moral influence. Harry and Meghan's children were not born in the realm. They were not baptized in royal chapels, nor were they granted traditional introductions. Lilibet met the Queen once, briefly, during the Platinum Jubilee, a meeting never confirmed in official photos, never displayed with public grace. Archie has barely had contact with his paternal side of the family in public, and so, in the eyes of tradition, they are outsiders. The Queen's phrase made that official. Still, many royal watchers, historians, and legal experts were quick to point out that the language was unprecedented in its clarity. Past monarchs have often danced around such exclusions, using softer language, leaving room for change. Queen Elizabeth chose not to do so. And that, more than the phrase itself, sent shockwaves through royal circles. One royal archivist noted the significance immediately. The use of the term residing within the realm ties royal recognition not to birthright, but to geography and loyalty, he explained. It is a clean break with the idea that being royal is automatic. It ties it to participation, to presence. The Queen was saying, to be royal, you must live it. But that interpretation alone doesn't fully capture the complexity behind the Queen's decision. To truly understand it, one must remember the many trials Elizabeth II endured during her reign: scandals, divorces, rogue family members, and waves of public disapproval. Through it all, she held the monarchy together by upholding a clear, rigid framework of duty. She believed in boundaries, decorum, and legacy. Meghan and Harry, in her view, had violated that framework. By stepping back from royal duties and launching public criticisms, through interviews, memoirs, and media deals, they had not simply left the monarchy. They had turned against it. And when they chose to raise their children outside the United Kingdom, without royal baptism or royal titles, the Queen likely saw that as a final statement. In that context, the Queen's phrase becomes more than a legal clause. It becomes a moral judgment, a declaration that to be royal, one must not only be born, but belong, not only be descended, but devoted. And this wasn't merely about a private family dispute. It was about continuity, about future monarchs, about the legacy of a 1,000-year-old institution. The Queen knew better than anyone how fragile that legacy had become in the age of social media, celebrity culture, and global skepticism. She may have loved her grandson. She may have even felt affection for his wife. But affection doesn't guarantee inclusion. This decision, then, was not made in haste. It was not reactive. It was, by all accounts, deliberate and final. There were reportedly 4 drafts of the will, each adjusted based on internal developments within the family. The final version, completed only weeks before her passing, contained the phrase. Those familiar with the process claimed the Queen herself edited the section by hand, after receiving private legal counsel and consulting only 2 senior royals, Charles and Anne. The implications go far beyond emotional consequence. For one, the legal ramifications are staggering. If Archie and Lilibet are not recognized, they may have no legal claim to estates, titles, or properties traditionally passed down through the royal bloodline. They may not be entitled to security stipends, ceremonial privileges, or formal invitations to royal events. In the royal world, where tradition governs legality as much as statutes do, exclusion is everything. Moreover, the symbolic weight of this phrasing extends to future reigns. King Charles, despite his personal feelings, is now bound by precedent. To recognize Archie and Lilibet under a new interpretation would appear to contradict the Queen's dying wishes. William, too, if and when he ascends, will face the burden of continuity. To reverse such a public exclusion would spark backlash, weaken his reign, and reopen divisions the Queen sought to close forever. And yet, some legal scholars have pointed out the ambiguity buried beneath the phrase. One Cambridge law professor, specializing in constitutional monarchy, suggested that the clause leaves narrow room for appeal. The definition of residing within the realm could, in theory, be satisfied later, should the children move to the UK and undergo the proper ceremonies. But such a move would require a complete reversal of Harry and Meghan's public stance, something few believe is likely, given their deepening entrenchment in American culture, media, and activism. From the perspective of royal loyalists, the Queen's phrase was a masterstroke, a final message of allegiance to tradition over populism. From the perspective of Sussex supporters, it was cruel, punishment disguised as protocol, a deliberate blow to 2 innocent children born into a feud not of their making. But for Queen Elizabeth, it was likely neither. It was protection of the monarchy, of its image, of its future. And in using such language, she made one final decision that echoed the same values she had displayed for 70 years: quiet resolve, institutional preservation, and a refusal to bend in the face of sentiment. This is the monarchy's version of war, not with swords, but with phrases, not with troops, but with lines drawn in wills. And the phrase, recognized royal descendants residing within the realm, may very well be remembered as one of the sharpest weapons Queen Elizabeth ever wielded. The final days of Queen Elizabeth II were steeped in silence and slow rituals. Behind the fortified walls of Balmoral Castle, away from the clicking of cameras and the breathless commentary of global media, Britain's longest-serving monarch prepared to do what she had done her entire life, her duty. But this time, the task was not a ribbon-cutting or a televised address. It was not a tour of the Commonwealth or a royal meeting with heads of state. It was the quiet, deliberate act of arranging the terms of her own legacy. To understand the gravity of the Queen's final decisions, one must first understand the loneliness of power. In the last year of her life, Queen Elizabeth had grown noticeably frailer. The death of her husband, Prince Philip, left her visibly diminished, not just physically, but emotionally. Though their relationship had its own royal tensions and imperfections, Philip had been her constant, the one who could speak plainly in a world where most chose deference over honesty. Without him, the Queen found herself relying more heavily on a tight circle of trusted figures, most notably Princess and, to a lesser degree, Charles and William. In these final months, the Queen's inner world became smaller, quieter, and more intense. Those who were granted access during that time speak of a woman who was sharp, deliberate, and focused, not broken, but resolved. There were no tears, no confessions, no wild declarations of regret. There was only structure, lists, legal briefings, and a consistent desire to bring closure to matters that had remained unresolved. Among these matters, perhaps the most emotionally complex was the issue of Harry and Meghan, and more precisely, their children. For years, the Queen had watched the events unfold with a mixture of caution and heartbreak. She had hoped, initially, that Harry's departure from royal duties might be temporary, a youthful rebellion, a phase born out of grief and confusion. She had hoped that marriage would bring him stability. But what she saw instead were headlines, lawsuits, and a growing media empire built around grievance. She saw interviews laced with accusations, a memoir filled with personal disclosures, and a calculated rebranding that framed the monarchy, the institution she had defended for her entire life, as cold, out of touch, and racially biased. The Queen was no stranger to scandal. She had lived through the Diana years, endured the shame of Prince Andrew's associations, and held firm during public calls to abolish the monarchy. But the Harry-Meghan ordeal was different. It wasn't just about individuals. It was about the image of the crown itself being undermined by those born within its gates. What hurt her the most, according to insiders, wasn't the criticism, it was the distance. It was the sense that Harry, once her cheerful, devoted grandson, had deliberately placed an ocean between himself and everything she represented. When Archie was born, she expressed joy, even arranging a private meeting. But as the months went on and the Sussexes pulled further away from palace life, opportunities to bond diminished. Lilibet's birth, especially, marked a turning point. Contrary to public assumptions, there was no grand rejection of the Queen. No door slammed in her face. Instead, there was avoidance. Months passed before arrangements were made for the Queen to meet her namesake. And even when they finally did, during the Platinum Jubilee, the encounter was brief, reportedly awkward, and conspicuously absent from public documentation. There were no official photos. No video of Her Majesty holding the child named in her honor. For a woman who understood the value of optics and gesture, the omission was both deliberate and meaningful. Behind closed doors, she was known to ask questions. Has Archie been christened yet in the Church of England? Will they bring the children to Sandringham for Christmas? The answers were often evasive or simply unknown. Royal aides began to speak, quietly and cautiously, about a shift in the Queen's thinking. She no longer viewed Harry and Meghan's absence as temporary. She began treating it as permanent. It was in this context that the final draft of her will began to take shape. She requested meetings with legal advisors on 3 occasions in the last 6 months of her life. During these sessions, documents were amended, not only in terms of financial inheritance, but also in symbolic declarations. She reportedly removed planned honors for certain individuals, reallocated items from her personal jewelry collection, and made notations about who would receive specific family heirlooms. These decisions were not emotional. They were structured, deliberate. Each one annotated with notes in her own hand, sometimes using phrases like based on conduct or to preserve continuity. One aide described the process as surgical. The Queen knew what was at stake, not just the material items, but the perception of fairness and stability after her death. She believed that her passing would trigger a period of instability for the monarchy, and she wanted her final actions to provide structure, clarity, and unity. But unity, as she saw it, did not mean appeasement. And when it came to Archie and Lilibet, she faced a stark reality. They had not been raised as royal children. They had not participated in royal rites. They had not lived in the realm. The queen was not vindictive, but she was a traditionalist, and tradition required lines to be drawn. Princess Anne was the first to be brought in. It was not a formal meeting, but a quiet conversation over tea, as had happened countless times before. The two women had a bond that was forged not just by blood, but by temperament. And the ever-loyal workhorse of the family had never sought the spotlight. She had never courted the press or capitalized on her lineage. She had simply done her duty, year after year. The queen respected that, trusted it. In their final conversations, the queen spoke of legacy, of protecting the crown, and of ensuring that her grandchildren and great-grandchildren understood the difference between heritage and entitlement. And listened quietly. She rarely offered opinions unless asked, but when asked, she was direct. They've made their choice, and reportedly said, "It's not our job to rescue them from the consequences." The queen didn't disagree. She nodded, sipped her tea, and returned to her notes. Later, it was Charles who attempted to soften the edges. Despite his own frustrations with Harry, he was a father. He worried about the optics, the long-term damage, and the emotional fallout. But the queen was unmoved. "Charles," she is said to have replied, "you will have time to be king. I have little time left to be mother to this institution." It was a chilling line, not for its coldness, but for its clarity. Elizabeth II had long seen herself not just as sovereign, but as a caretaker. She had preserved the monarchy through scandal, war, and generational change. She had redefined it for a world that increasingly questioned its purpose. And now, she was preparing to pass it on intact, stable, and unambiguous. The will was finalized days before her condition worsened. By then, few were granted access. Princess Anne was among them. She was informed not only of the contents but of her role in revealing certain parts when the time came. The queen chose, and because she knew and would not falter. She would not hesitate. She would not frame it with unnecessary sentiment. The queen's final days were spent in quiet observation. She continued to receive the red boxes of government business, albeit at a reduced pace. She took short walks. She spoke occasionally of her parents, of her early days on the throne, and of the importance of order. In her final letter to the Privy Council, she re-emphasized her desire that matters of succession, inheritance, and royal designation remain rooted in the laws, customs, and expectations that have defined our monarchy for generations. By the time the queen passed, she had said all she intended to say. And in the hands of Anne, those final declarations would be carried out without revision or hesitation. The public would only learn of the will's more controversial sections weeks later. But by then, the queen's intentions were clear. She had made her decision. She had drawn her line. And she had done so not out of bitterness, but out of loyalty to the institution she had sworn to serve until her final breath. There is a reason why Queen Elizabeth chose Princess Anne. Not Charles, not William, not even a trusted legal official, to be the voice that carried out one of the most defining and emotionally loaded instructions in her final will. That decision was not made lightly. It was a reflection of trust, consistency, and an understanding that when the moment called for unflinching loyalty to principle over emotion and would not bend. Princess Anne has long been the monarchy's unsung pillar, often overshadowed by her more media-attracting siblings and nephews. She has quietly built a reputation as the most hard-working royal. With hundreds of engagements each year, a career in military service, and a demeanor that values substance over spectacle, and has earned something far more powerful than public adoration, internal reverence. She is the monarchy's stabilizer, the quiet compass behind the curtain, and in the queen's final hours, she became its sword, and had always been close to her mother. Not in the showy way tabloids love to capture, but in a private, resilient way born from mutual understanding. Both women were known for their discipline, distaste for drama, and commitment to duty, and had watched, up close, the unraveling of the House of Windsor's public image in the 1990s and had personally carried some of the weight of rebuilding it. Through Diana's tragic death, Andrew's disgrace, and Harry and Meghan's highly publicized split, and remained grounded. So when the Queen informed her that she would be tasked with revealing the most controversial element of her final wishes, and didn't protest, she didn't blink. She accepted the responsibility the way she had accepted every other duty, without hesitation, without need for public acknowledgement. There are those within the palace who claim, and had known the truth for months, that she had been present for the Queen's final legal consultation. that she had even helped draft the language used in the clause that would eventually exclude Archie and Lilibet from royal recognition. While unconfirmed, this theory gained strength from one undeniable fact, and carried out her duty with an eerie calm, as if the outcome had been inevitable all along. The scene, as reconstructed by multiple sources close to the palace, was striking in its simplicity. And entered the room wearing her signature blazer, hair pulled back in the same no-nonsense bun she'd worn for decades. She carried a small folder, unmarked, unadorned. The room, though filled with some of the most powerful figures in the royal family, fell silent. Charles sat by the fireplace, his expression unreadable. Camilla shifted in her chair, occasionally glancing at her husband. William stood near the window, arms crossed, eyes narrowed, and opened the folder and began to read. There was no preamble, no hesitation, just the Queen's words, delivered with clinical precision. The sovereign title and recognition of royal descendants shall extend exclusively to those who remain present within the jurisdiction of the Crown and maintain active recognition of its structure. She continued, clarifying the limitations. Then came the most seismic passage. This excludes, by structure and circumstance, the children of Prince Harry, Duke of Sussex, as they have not been formally presented to the monarchy within realm-defined tradition, nor have they resided under the Crown's legal or ceremonial authority. And finished reading, closed the folder, and looked up. No apology, no explanation, just execution. It was this moment that defined not just Anne's role in the Queen's final act, but her legacy as the monarchy's enforcer. Privately, some aides later remarked that Anne was the only royal who could have pulled it off without fracturing the family further. Her reputation for impartiality, neither swayed by emotion nor by politics, made her the ideal messenger. She wasn't known to leak. She didn't seek sympathy. She didn't grant interviews. In short, she was untouchable. But Anne's strength didn't come from coldness. It came from clarity. For her, the monarchy wasn't a sentimental idea. It was a job, an institution, one that required maintenance, discipline, and sacrifice. And she believed deeply that preserving the crown sometimes meant making unpopular decisions. In the case of Archie and Lilibet, she viewed the Queen's clause not as an act of cruelty, but of reinforcement, and had never been one to coddle, not even her own children. Her son, Peter Phillips, and daughter, Zara Tyndall, were both raised without royal titles at her request. She believed that titles should come with responsibility, not just privilege. That belief likely informed her unwavering stance in delivering the Queen's wishes. And the consequences of that delivery were swift. Within hours of the announcement, media outlets around the world seized on the revelation. Headlines declared it a royal snub, a betrayal, a final slap in the face to the Sussexes. Yet behind palace walls, Anne remained unaffected. She returned to her usual routine, visiting local charities, attending scheduled military events, and making no public comment on the matter. When asked by a journalist days later if she had any thoughts on the public backlash, Anne simply replied, "I did what was asked. Nothing more." Those 6 words summed up her entire philosophy. She was a servant of the monarchy, not its mouthpiece. And she had no interest in playing to the gallery. Still, even within her own family, her role drew mixed reactions. Charles reportedly wrestled with guilt. Though he had signed off on the Queen's final wording, he had hoped it wouldn't come to a public confrontation. Some insiders say he asked Anne if there might have been a gentler way to deliver the message. Anne's response, allegedly, was blunt. There's nothing gentle about exclusion. There's only clarity or chaos. Mother chose clarity. William, by contrast, expressed gratitude, albeit privately. He understood the necessity of the moment. He knew the crown could not afford ambiguity, especially not as he prepared to one day take the throne. He and Anne shared several meetings after the announcement, discussing the fallout and potential long-term effects on public trust. One aide said the conversations were strategic, not emotional. Meanwhile, Harry and Meghan's camp erupted. Reports from California suggest that Meghan was devastated by Anne's delivery, that she viewed the Princess Royal as cold, calculated, and outdated. Harry, while more restrained, was said to be furious, not just at the exclusion itself, but at the way it was handled. Some sources claimed he expected his father to break the news privately. That Anne's public role in it felt like a betrayal. But even in the face of this backlash, Anne remained firm. She knew the history. She knew the stakes. and she understood that her mother had entrusted her with something more than a task. She had entrusted her with the defense of tradition in its most vulnerable hour. There were some within royal circles who believed Anne's delivery marked a turning point, not just for the Sussex saga, but for the monarchy's entire approach to self-preservation. It was a declaration that the crown would no longer play by the rules of public appeasement, that titles, recognition, and inclusion would be tied to presence, to contribution, and to loyalty. In the weeks that followed, Anne continued to operate as she always had, quietly, efficiently, and without drama. While other royals sought to mend bridges or navigate media narratives, she focused on her duties. And in doing so, she sent a clear message: the monarchy is not built on emotion. It is built on duty. And when that duty called for her to deliver a painful truth, she did so without hesitation. Princess Anne has never been the monarchy's flashiest figure. She rarely trends on social media. She doesn't provoke headlines or scandals. But when the crown needed a protector, someone who would stand between sentiment and structure, chaos and order, it was Anne who stepped forward. Not with fanfare, not with pride, but with a folder, a steady voice, and a lifetime of earned authority. While the walls of Buckingham Palace trembled with the aftershock of Queen Elizabeth's final will, thousands of miles away in Montecito, California, another storm was brewing. One that had been slowly gathering for years but now threatened to explode with renewed intensity. Meghan Markle and Prince Harry had long styled themselves as champions of personal freedom and modern values, constructing a life that boldly departed from royal tradition. But now, in the wake of their children's exclusion from royal recognition, the world turned its gaze back onto their American existence, not with admiration, but with pointed suspicion. The media narrative, once dominated by the couple's carefully curated interviews and docuseries, shifted almost overnight. Every decision they had made since stepping down from royal duties was put under a microscope. The timing of their exit from the United Kingdom, the lucrative deals with streaming platforms, the public allegations leveled against the royal family, and most significantly, the conscious decision to raise Archie and Lilibet far away from the institution that defined Harry's lineage. Critics began asking the questions that the couple's supporters had long brushed aside. Did Harry and Meghan knowingly distance their children from royal traditions in anticipation of this very outcome? Was this exclusion truly a surprise, or had it been, in some ways, invited? To answer those questions, one must trace the timeline of their American life and examine the deliberate moves they made to untether themselves and their children from the monarchy. It began in 2020 with what became known as Megxit. The announcement came as a shock, not just to the public, but reportedly to the Queen herself. Meghan and Harry declared they would step back as senior members of the royal family and become financially independent. Though initially framed as a transition rather than a total departure, the reality soon became clear. This was an exit in every sense of the word. Within months, the couple relocated to North America, first Canada, then California. They purchased a sprawling estate in Montecito, far removed from the media frenzy of Los Angeles, but close enough to Hollywood to maintain ties to the entertainment industry. The move symbolized more than geography. It was ideological, a declaration that they would chart a new path, one that did not rely on inherited duty but on personal brand and message control. In the years that followed, Harry and Meghan forged a media empire. They signed multi-million-dollar deals with Netflix and Spotify, launched the Archewell Foundation, and began a steady stream of public engagements, some philanthropic, others deeply personal. In every appearance, they leaned into their narrative of independence, often highlighting the emotional toll of royal life and the perceived injustices they had endured within the institution. The centerpiece of their media campaign came in 2021 during their interview with Oprah Winfrey. It was during this now infamous sit-down that they laid bare their grievances, accusations of racism, neglect, and betrayal. The interview rocked the monarchy and reshaped public opinion. For many, it was a moment of vindication. For others, it was seen as a calculated attack on the institution they had once vowed to serve. Yet amid all the headlines that followed, one detail stood out in retrospect: Meghan's assertion that there had been concerns within the palace about Archie's skin color and that these concerns had influenced decisions about his title and protection. The implication was clear: race had played a role in his marginalization. But now, with the release of the Queen's will and the deliberate phrasing excluding any royal descendant not residing within the realm, a different narrative began to emerge, one that focused not on race, but on protocol, presence, and participation. Archie and Lilibet had never been formally presented to the Queen in accordance with royal tradition. They had not been christened in the Church of England. They had not been brought to Sandringham for Christmas, nor to Trooping the Colour, nor to any of the ceremonial events that typically define a royal upbringing. Their absence, some argued, had been their parents' choice. Supporters of the Queen's decision pointed out that many of these opportunities had been offered, that Harry and Meghan had been invited, on multiple occasions, to bring their children to the UK for ceremonies and introductions. Each time, the offers were declined or delayed, often citing concerns about media intrusion or security. But critics pushed back, arguing that the Sussexes were forced into isolation by the toxic atmosphere surrounding their departure, that it was unreasonable to expect them to subject their young children to an environment they believed to be unsafe or hostile. The debate raged on across news outlets, social media platforms, and even dinner tables. In the midst of this firestorm, Meghan and Harry maintained a studied silence. Official statements were scarce. Meghan was seen briefly outside a yoga studio, avoiding questions from the press. Harry appeared at a charity polo match, smiling but visibly tense. Inside sources claimed the couple was deeply hurt by the Queen's phrasing and furious that and had been the one to deliver it. Yet behind the scenes, their world was shifting. Several high-profile media projects were reportedly put on hold. A planned Netflix follow-up series, centered on their life as parents, was quietly shelved. Brand partnerships began to reconsider their associations, worried about the optics of a couple increasingly framed as outcasts by the very institution that once gave them global relevance. More damaging, however, was the shift in public sentiment. Among their American base, particularly in liberal circles, there remained strong support for Meghan and Harry's decision to break free from the monarchy. But among moderates and global royal observers, there was growing fatigue. Fatigue with the narrative of victimhood. Fatigue with the selective privacy. Fatigue with the implication that one can both sever ties and demand privileges. This duality became even more apparent when analyzing the public records of Archie and Lilibet's upbringing. According to official documents, neither child has been baptized in a traditional Anglican ceremony. While there were private blessings and family rituals, nothing matched the royal standard. Furthermore, both children were reportedly listed under simplified surnames in American legal filings, rather than the full Mountbatten-Windsor designation. Even their public visibility was curated. Rarely photographed, and never in formal royal settings, Archie and Lilibet became symbols of the life their parents had chosen, a life of curated access, selective exposure, and conscious detachment from institutional obligation. Supporters argued that this was the ultimate act of good parenting, shielding children from a system that had, in their view, chewed up and spit out Diana, and sought to do the same with Meghan. But critics argued that this detachment came at a cost. That by removing their children from the very traditions and connections that grounded their heritage, Meghan and Harry had made a choice. A choice that the Queens will simply affirmed. That affirmation now threatens to redefine how the public sees the couple. Not as rebels, but as architects of their own marginalization. In the echo chamber of Montecito, where publicists and lawyers often outnumber friends and family, the mood reportedly turned defensive. Sources close to the couple suggested they were considering legal avenues. Others hinted at a new documentary that would tell the real story behind the Queen's will. Still others claimed the couple was simply in shock, that they had expected reconciliation, not rejection. But perhaps the greatest damage came not from the Queen's words, but from what they exposed, the chasm between Harry and the family he once called home. A chasm widened not by one decision, but by 1,000 choices. A gradual drift, disguised as independence, but now made painfully clear by 7 carefully chosen words. Residing within the realm. It was a phrase that went beyond geography. It spoke to allegiance, to participation, to the soul of monarchy itself. And Meghan and Harry, for all their influence, had chosen a different realm entirely. The shockwaves from Queen Elizabeth's will were not confined to the walls of royal estates or the corners of Buckingham Palace. They reverberated far beyond the United Kingdom, crashing into living rooms, newsrooms, and social platforms in real time. The world had barely digested the announcement before it splintered into opposing camps. The monarchy, once a symbol of quiet continuity, was now the epicenter of a loud and emotionally charged global debate. And at the heart of that debate were 2 small children, Archie and Lilibet, and the question of whether they truly belonged in the house their father was born into. In Britain, the mood among traditional royal supporters was firm, if not celebratory. The Queen had made a clear decision. She had chosen the monarchy over emotion, legacy over compromise. Conservative columnists hailed the will as a bold, necessary reinforcement of royal values. The Daily Mail, within hours of the revelation, published a triumphant headline: "Queen stands tall from the grave. Her Majesty's final duty restores royal order." The editorial beneath it was blunt. What the Duke and Duchess of Sussex wanted was to enjoy the fruits of royal status without fulfilling its responsibilities. Her Majesty's final act says, no more. You cannot abandon the realm and expect the realm to embrace your children. That's not cruelty. That's consequence. Talk radio followed suit. Callers phoned in with fierce support for the Queen's language. "I love Harry, I do," said one pensioner from Essex. "But he's chosen a different path." The Queen didn't disown his kids. She just said they're not part of the system he left. That's fair. Another caller, a middle-aged father from Manchester, said, "What example would it set if you could just move to America, tear the family apart publicly, and still expect titles and recognition?" No. Enough is enough. On social media, hashtags like #DutyBeforeDrama and #LongLiveTheCrown began trending. Twitter and Threads became digital battlegrounds, with users quoting portions of the will and attaching side-by-side photos of Harry with his family in happier times. Some users posted gifs of Princess Anne, calling her the Iron Ant, while others shared clips of Queen Elizabeth's past speeches, overlaying them with the phrase, "residing within the realm." But not everyone saw the Queen's actions as noble. Across the Atlantic, in the United States, especially among liberal circles, young activists, and celebrity influencers, the response was sharply different. The exclusion of Archie and Lilibet was seen not as a principled decision, but as a punishment cloaked in tradition. Prominent commentators on talk shows and podcasts expressed outrage. "Let's call it what it is," said one host on a major U.S. morning program. "The monarchy has always been about exclusion. It's about control." And now, they've decided to erase 2 biracial children from the royal story. That's not protocol. That's prejudice. Within 24 hours, major cultural outlets had published opinion pieces decrying the decision. One op-ed in the New Yorker titled, "The Crown's Quiet Cruelty," argued that the will's language was a final slap to a family already wounded by race, rejection, and relentless tradition. Another in The Atlantic accused the royal family of weaponizing legal language to disguise emotional abandonment. Celebrities weighed in, too. A-list actors who had previously voiced support for Meghan, especially after the Oprah interview, took to social media. Some posted cryptic quotes about family betrayal and legacy. Others were more direct. One actress wrote, "If a grandmother can exclude her great-grandchildren because their parents spoke up, what does that say about the crown?" Her post was liked over 1.2 million times in less than a day. Meghan and Harry's defenders also seized the moment to reframe the narrative. Prominent figures close to their inner circle hinted that this was a long time coming. A former Archewell advisor anonymously told a U.S. outlet, "There were conversations in 2022 about how far the palace might go to protect itself. Meghan always feared they'd find a way to write the kids out of the royal picture. Now it's done, by the one woman who had the power to stop it and chose not to." Still, even among those sympathetic to the Sussexes, there were fractures. A growing number of political commentators, both in the U.S. and abroad, began raising uncomfortable questions. Why hadn't Harry and Meghan ensured their children met traditional requirements, christenings, ceremonial appearances, royal introductions? If they were so concerned about being cut off, why did they remove themselves so thoroughly from royal engagement? The narrative, once a clean binary of victims and villains, began to blur. In Commonwealth nations like Canada, Australia, and New Zealand, the reaction was more mixed. Some saw the Queen's decision as a final assertion of British colonial rigidity, a reminder that the monarchy still viewed itself through an archaic lens. Indigenous activists in New Zealand condemned the move as symbolic of the Crown's broader failure to adapt. "This isn't just about Archie and Lilibet," one Maori leader tweeted. "It's about how the Crown continues to define worthiness based on proximity to power." Meanwhile, in Canada, where the Sussexes briefly lived after stepping down, polls showed a split public. Older Canadians leaned toward supporting the Queen's position. Younger citizens, however, expressed confusion and disapproval. "I thought monarchy was about family," wrote a 21-year-old university student from Toronto. "Now it feels like a corporation that cuts you off when you stop making them money." The impact on the monarchy's global image was immediate. International media outlets began revisiting past controversies, the handling of Diana's death, Prince Andrew's scandals, the institution's troubled legacy with race and colonialism. Even countries that had remained relatively neutral on the subject of Harry and Meghan found themselves pulled into the conversation. In South Africa, one prominent newspaper editorial said, "It is telling that a family so consumed with bloodline cannot find space in its heart for two children who represent its future more accurately than many of its past heirs." The Queen's will may have closed a chapter, but it has opened a question. The royal family's communications office responded with predictable restraint. A brief statement was issued reiterating that the Queen's will was crafted with full legal consultation and deep personal reflection. It added, "Her Majesty's lifelong commitment to duty and tradition guided every decision she made, including those shared in her final wishes." No further clarification was given. No elaboration. And notably, neither King Charles nor Prince William issued personal statements. Their silence, though expected, was interpreted in many ways. Some saw it as an effort to avoid inflaming tensions. Others saw it as passive approval of the Queen's stance. The lack of direct response from the palace only deepened the divide. Commentators on both sides began speculating what the long-term effects would be. Would this erode Meghan and Harry's influence? Would it reignite calls to dissolve the monarchy altogether? Or would this simply fade, as so many royal controversies had, into the endless churn of news cycles? The answer remained elusive, but what was certain was this. The Queen's final will had not brought closure. It had opened a wound that would now fester in the court of public opinion for years to come. Beyond the press, the public responded with everything from quiet reflection to explosive anger. In London, outside Kensington Palace, tourists left notes and flowers, some praising the Queen for her clarity, others begging for forgiveness for Archie and Lilibet. In Los Angeles, murals appeared overnight featuring stylized portraits of Meghan and her children under the words "erased but not forgotten." Digital forums lit up with theories, counter-theories, and endless speculation. Was there more to the will that hadn't been revealed? Would Anne's delivery be challenged in court? Would Harry retaliate with another memoir? Or a tell-all special that exposed the final private moments of the Queen? The public was watching, waiting, choosing sides. And in the middle of it all, two children, unaware, innocent, had become the battleground for a monarchy's future. As the dust settled from the public revelation of Queen Elizabeth II's final will, and as the media frenzy transitioned from initial shock to deeper analysis, legal questions began to take center stage. Could Prince Harry and Meghan Markle legally challenge the will? Did Archie and Lilibet have a rightful claim to royal recognition that could be defended in court? Or was the Queen's phrasing airtight, strategic, absolute, and legally insulated from any form of public or private challenge? To answer those questions, it's important to understand the unique legal status of royal wills and the monarchy's legal framework as a whole. Unlike the wills of ordinary British citizens, the wills of senior members of the royal family are treated as private documents. Historically, they are not made public unless there is a deliberate leak or selective disclosure from within the royal household. This secrecy was designed to protect the dignity and privacy of the crown. Queen Elizabeth's own father, King George VI, had his will sealed upon death. So did Princess Margaret and Prince Philip. In fact, the High Court in 2021 ruled that Prince Philip's will would remain sealed for at least 90 years to protect the dignity and standing of the Queen. However, in the case of Queen Elizabeth II, parts of the will were publicly confirmed through an announcement made by Princess and in a subsequent palace press release, an unprecedented move. The reason behind this partial disclosure remains unclear, but it's widely speculated that the Queen wanted her intentions to be beyond question and shielded from misinterpretation. But even with these details now public, the legal implications remain murky. The first and perhaps most significant point is this. Under British law, royal wills are not subject to the same probate procedures as civilian wills. They are exempt from public scrutiny, and their execution is often conducted in consultation with the monarch's most trusted legal advisors and the Lord Chamberlain. This makes them extremely difficult to challenge. In essence, the monarchy polices itself on such matters. If Harry and Meghan were to consider contesting the will in a British court, their legal standing would likely be questioned. They would need to prove not only that the will excluded Archie and Lilibet unjustly, but that it violated a legal expectation or an established inheritance right. Yet, as it stands, Archie and Lilibet are not legally entitled to anything by default. Titles and royal recognition are not guaranteed by blood alone. They are granted at the discretion of the sovereign, and they remain revocable. British constitutional law, though uncodified, has established over time that the monarch has full discretion in matters of royal titles and recognition. This means that Queen Elizabeth, as reigning monarch at the time of her death, had every legal right to define recognition as she saw fit. Her phrase, recognized royal descendants residing within the realm, does not contradict any written law. It simply reaffirms her sovereign authority. Even so, some legal scholars suggest that Harry and Meghan could attempt a symbolic challenge rather than a substantive one. For instance, they could request a judicial review, not to overturn the will, but to question the transparency and fairness of the monarchy's processes. This would be a bold and controversial move, likely to provoke constitutional backlash and political embarrassment. No member of the royal family has ever attempted such a challenge in modern history. Doing so would draw unprecedented legal scrutiny upon the crown. Something Harry, who has spoken frequently about preserving certain royal traditions despite his personal distance, may be reluctant to do. There's also the matter of jurisdiction. Harry and Meghan now reside in the United States and are U.S. taxpayers. Their children were born on American soil. Any legal action launched from their side would have to navigate a transatlantic legal labyrinth balancing British royal tradition, UK constitutional norms, and U.S. citizenship rights. American courts have no jurisdiction over the Crown's internal operations, and British courts have long resisted wading into the private mechanisms of the monarchy. Still, the couple may not be entirely without options. Legal insiders have quietly speculated that the Sussexes could mount a public pressure campaign instead of a formal legal one. By releasing detailed personal accounts, strategic media appearances, or leveraging support from high-profile allies, they might aim to create such intense public backlash that King Charles, or even Prince William in the future, could be forced to revisit the issue. This wouldn't be a legal victory, per se, it would be a political and reputational one. If public support leaned heavily in favor of Archie and Lilibet being reinstated or recognized officially, the monarchy could face serious image damage by maintaining their exclusion. This method, pressure by narrative, not statute, is something Harry and Meghan have already used to some effect in past campaigns, most notably after the Oprah interview. There is also the possibility of leveraging the Commonwealth. Harry and Meghan still retain considerable popularity in certain parts of the former empire, particularly in younger demographics. If political voices in countries like Canada, Australia, or Jamaica begin calling out the royal family for its treatment of the biracial children of a former senior royal, the resulting scrutiny could reignite Republican movements and force a broader institutional reckoning. However, this strategy is not without risk. It would position the Sussexes in direct conflict with the institution in a way that may forever sever any hope of reconciliation. Up until this point, despite all the allegations and media battles, Harry has kept a rhetorical door open, expressing love for his father and grandmother, repeatedly saying he wishes to repair the relationship. A legal challenge, or even a full-scale public shaming campaign, would likely eliminate that possibility entirely. And the cost wouldn't just be personal, it could be financial and reputational. The Sussexes brand relies heavily on a balance between independence and former royal prestige. If that thread is cut entirely, they may lose the very identity that allows them to command attention, endorsements, and relevance in global media. Already, companies that once rushed to sign partnerships are reportedly becoming more cautious, especially as public opinion becomes more polarized. For Meghan in particular, the stakes are immense. A legal battle that centers on exclusion from the monarchy would almost certainly reawaken the racism debate in full force. It would draw sharp lines between supporters and critics, reigniting tensions not only between the couple and the royal family but between different cultural and political groups around the world. While that may generate headlines, it could also alienate moderate supporters and strain the patience of donors and investors associated with Archewell and other initiatives. Another complication lies in succession law. The titles of prince and princess were automatically available to Archie and Lilibet following Charles's accession to the throne, according to the 1917 letters patent issued by King George V. But that law, while clear in intent, is also subject to the monarch's discretion. King Charles could theoretically issue new letters patent to redefine eligibility. And it's worth noting that the Queen's will, by specifying only recognized royal descendants residing within the realm, appears to override the spirit, if not the letter, of the George V edict. If challenged, such a contradiction would force courts to decide whether the Queen's final instructions carry more weight than historical precedent. Given the principle of sovereign supremacy, it is almost certain they would. There is one final, delicate issue that could change the calculus: the children themselves. As Archie and Lilibet grow older, they may, in theory, have the standing to challenge their status as private individuals. They may one day assert their rights as direct royal descendants. But such a case would be unprecedented and extremely complex. It would require adult participation, clear legal strategy, and a willingness to challenge the monarchy at its core. For now, the Sussexes appear to be weighing their options. There has been no confirmed legal filing, no petition, no lawsuit. But the mood among insiders suggests that Harry and Meghan are deeply unsettled by the will's implications and are exploring all paths forward: legal, strategic, and media-driven. One royal insider summed it up bluntly: the Queen didn't just close a door. She locked it. Now it's up to Harry and Meghan to decide whether to try and break it down or walk away from it forever. In a revelation that has stunned the monarchy and shaken royal watchers across the globe, Princess and has just confirmed that Queen Elizabeth's final will exclude Archie and Lilibet from royal recognition, citing a chilling clause that only includes recognized royal descendants residing within the realm. That means no titles, no inheritance, and no acknowledgement as part of the Windsor legacy. Why did the Queen make this decision before her death? What role did Princess Anne play? And how are Meghan and Harry reacting behind closed doors in California? Stay with us. What we uncovered will leave you speechless.